What's up, guys? I hope you had an awesome weekend. Did you watch the Formula E race? I don't know if you did, but honestly, I was commentating on it for the radio. I thought it was spectacular. Another spectacular Formula E race. I was breathless by the end of the last lap. The lead kind of three cars almost pushed each other across the line, almost neck and neck. I mean, close racing. We are never short of close racing in Formula E. So complain about what you like, diss it as much as you want. The racing, which is at the absolute heart of Formula E, is just brilliant. Anyway, that's my Formula E rant over. I hope you enjoyed it if you watched it. I hope you had a great weekend, whatever you were up to. Today's Monday, which means it's Q&A Monday, which means it's time to roll the sting. Right, loads of questions as ever, so thank you very much to everybody. Let's start with this one. This is on a Formula E tip. This comes from Dominus. He says, will Van Doorn manage to improve and win in Formula E, or did he lose his talent? No, he did not lose his talent, absolutely not. I still rate Stoffel Van Doorn very, very highly within the driver kind of pecking order, if you like. The biggest thing which he's finding out now, and pretty much everybody who's come into Formula E with their first effort, is finding that it's difficult. It's a massive challenge. It's a very different challenge. He's come into a team that's also brand new as well. He's got Gary Paffett alongside him as his teammate, who's another incredibly good driver, current DTM champion, but that HWA squad, who have no Formula E experience, I mean, very little within their entire ranks, to be fair, but certainly none as a team, are finding it very difficult on what it takes to get the best out of that car. Sometimes you find drivers come in, can bang in a very quick qualifying lap, because qualifying is the same as it's always been in any motorsport they've ever driven in. It's about getting the best out of your car over one single lap. When it comes to racing in Formula E, though, it's about energy management, it's about efficiency. You've got to have patience, you've got to have intelligence, and these are all things that people have had little bits of in different categories, but they've never had to put the whole lot together like they do in Formula E. So that is going to take some time, but I have no doubt that Stoffel Van Doorn will eventually make it up to become a successful Formula E driver. Highly tipped to be on the to be one of the drivers for the full blown factory Mercedes effort coming into Formula E for next season. Sticking with Formula E, Will says, with the car swaps scrapped, so the mid-race car swaps scrapped, what role do the pit crew play in Formula E races? Well, I guess a little bit like in Formula 1, the pit crew are not there only to do pit stops or car swaps. They are also the mechanics, the engineers, the people who are generally working on the cars all weekend long. So it's not like they've got nothing to do now. They've still got plenty to do. It's just that during the race, that element, that pit stop element, has now gone, so I guess they now get to watch the race. Coming back to F1 then, Neil Wells West says, hi Mark, regarding the sound of F1 cars, I'd be keen to hear whether the conversation should focus less on loudness and more on the actual sound. For example, pitch, doppering and off-throttle crackle that the normally aspirated engines are so famous for. Neil, I totally agree with you. I think the volume level, we're all harking after something that was 10, 15, 20 years ago in Formula 1. This incredible 21,000 RPM, just screaming engine that reverberated for miles and miles around. That's gone, and it is not coming back. Because if you want to get that back, you've got to go back to massive V8, V10, V12, 21,000 RPM engines, and that's old technology. That's not going to be coming back into Formula 1. So we've got what we've got. The sound of a current Formula 1 engine, I don't think, is particularly inspirational. Making that sound louder just makes it a louder, slightly uninspirational sound. So I totally agree with you, Neil. I think the high-pitched scream, the squeal, was what kind of sent your bones shaking, didn't it? Gave you goosebumps. But I think the reality is we're probably not going to get that back either. We've moved the technology forward to these hybrid power units with turbos, and all of that technology, just in its very essence, takes away some of that sound that's disappearing out of the exhaust pipe. So I think whilst we'd all love to have, and we all love to sort of hear that noise whenever we see an old clip of F1, I think those days are just gone, and we need to kind of get over that, and we need to focus on other elements of F1. We need to focus on amazing technology. Can we get back to great racing somehow? The brilliant drivers, the brilliant teams, those are the things we need to focus on. The sound that we once had is over, it's gone. David Ian Dawson says, this may be a dull question for some. Either way, I'd be most intrigued on how an F1 car is switched off, i.e. is it a switch on the steering wheel or elsewhere in the cockpit? Whilst a basic question, I've not been able to find this information anywhere despite my best sleuthing. Well, David, I mean, there's no such thing as a stupid question at all, or a boring question. And the very quick answer and simple answer is that there is a switch. It can be placed anywhere in the cockpit. It's normally down on one of the control panels to the right or left of the driver. And it's literally a kind of three-position switch. One of those positions will be fully off. The other position will be powered up, and then the third position will be full ignition to be able to start the engine. So not a silly question, very simple question, but very simple answer. Chris C. As an engineer, did you ever get to drive a real F1 car or even use their simulators at McLaren? If so, how did this compare? Or if not, is this the closest F1 racing experience you've had? I think you may have been spoilt forever when it comes to sim racing. And he's referring, Chris, to the video I did with Jimmy Broadbent, where I went to use his incredible sim racing setup down in his shed. If you haven't seen it, I will link it. I'll link it at the end. Chris, the answer is I never got to drive the real car. Nobody but the drivers ever did or ever do. Very, very rare. Did I get to use the simulators? Yes, I did. I was able to use McLaren simulators on a number of occasions, and they're incredible. And the biggest difference between what I used at Jimmy's place, or anybody can have as a kind of home setup, no matter how professional, the biggest difference was that this was in a full cockpit. So it was in a McLaren cockpit. It was linked up to hydraulic actuators to make the car, the chassis shuffle around. We had hydraulic actuators linked up to a crash helmet to simulate the G-forces on your neck muscles. And of course you had this entire room of wraparound panoramic screen which gives you that absolute full immersion. So I don't think in any home setup you're going to be able to replicate that. That was mind-blowing stuff. But what Jimmy had and what I experienced down there and what I know is now available as a consumer, you know, whether it be high-end consumer or otherwise, is pretty bloody good. Rob Hitchins says, on the subject of McLaren and in some ways Indy, do you think it's the right move employing Bob Burnley and putting him on the Indy project? Surely he'd have been a bigger benefit to their F1 team at present. So Bob Burnley is president of McLaren's IndyCar project now. He'll head up that operation, reporting to Zach Brown. Should he have been on the F1 side? I don't think so. I don't think... Look, I have huge respect for Bob. He's been able to achieve incredible things with Force India on a minimal budget, I guess, as well. He's built a very strong, solid team there. And those are all incredibly good assets to have. And they're assets that will apply to this Indy project as well. He's got to build a team from scratch, and I think he'll do a great job of that. But does he fit in with McLaren's F1 program? I don't think Bob is a fit for the McLaren F1 side. McLaren F1 is a very specific organisation. They have specific ways of doing things. It's changed slightly since the Ron Dennis era, but I don't think Bob Burnley fits in with that way. It's a very rigid program, isn't it, at McLaren? It's a very kind of almost stiff and almost inflexible to some extent, and that may be harsh. I don't mean that to be harsh on McLaren, but I just don't think that Bob Burnley is the type of character that fits into that McLaren F1 program. So what he does bring to the Indy project, he has already got experience of IndyCar, of North American racing, so that's a first plus. He's obviously got this incredible talent with building this team and managing a team on a lower budget. He's got experience of essentially running that team in the absence of Vijay Mallya. So look, he brings an awful lot to the programme, and I think he's a great asset to McLaren to have. And I just think putting him on the IndyCar project, actually, if Bob's happy with that, which he seems to be, I think that's a great appointment. Also on this sim racing thread, off the back of the video I did with Jimmy Broadbent, Extra John says, Mark, will you start sim racing now? Get a rig and all. Come on, join us. So look, I am starting to get into it. It's a slow process, just simply because I've got limited amount of time to be able to throw at this. I am going to get more heavily involved with sim racing over the course of 2019. I'm starting slowly, I'm going to build up to it. Whether I get a full rig, at the moment I've just about managed to convince my missus to keep the play seat set up in our TV room, so, and the Logitech steering wheel and pedals set, which is brilliant, by the way. I love that stuff. If you're in the market for consumer grade wheels and pedals for that kind of operation, the Logitech stuff is great, so check it out. I don't think at the moment I'll be going for the full-on rig, anything like what Jimmy had. But at the moment, what I've got right now is a great place to start, and you'll be able to follow that journey as I go through it. So, so stick with the channel. Subscribe if you're not already. Janitor is back, says, I've just watched a video on Formula One's YouTube page where they're following a Williams car in practice, and it got me wondering if there's a specific reason why Williams has the car data screen detached from the wheel where every other team has it on the wheel. No, I mean there isn't really, other than the fact that it's their preference, and they've always had it this way. They prefer to have their information display in a fixed position on the front of the cockpit surround, whereas most other teams, in fact I think all other teams now, have it on the wheel. The advantage of having it in the fixed position is that when you're turning the wheel, of course, going through a corner, the display doesn't turn, so the display stays at that horizontal angle. The downside is that as you turn the wheel, your hands and everything can cover that display. So there are pros and cons to both, and I think it generally just comes down to driver preference and to team preference, and Williams have kind of always gone that way, so it's nothing more scientific than that. Keith Major says, what's up Mark? What's up Keith? Does the recent news about the F1 overtaking sim mean the death knell to circuits where it's difficult to overtake? I don't think it does, you know, Keith. This is referring to comments that Pat Simmons made at the Autosport show, where he said F1 have developed a very complex simulator for simulating overtaking opportunities and helping to design track layouts. They're using it heavily in the Vietnam track that's currently being designed at the moment. I think it's a great thing that they're doing it, because look, anything that goes from now forwards looks like it might well be designed with some serious thought put into overtaking, and this could mean, as I talked about once before with Lucas de Grassi's series of tweets he put out a while ago, multiple different lines going round a corner. If we can come up with a circuit that gives multiple opportunities, multiple fast ways around a corner, you create some kind of variation, and you then create overtaking opportunities that way. So is it going to mean the death knell for the old-fashioned circuits? I don't think so. I think the more traditional places we go, like Monza, like Silverstone, those traditional tracks have very limited scope for being able to modify them, for being able to change the layout. They're there, they've been there forever, and I suspect they'll stay there forever because of the tradition and the heritage that they have. Other places though, places like Abu Dhabi that are have been laid out in this enormous expanse and have room to change them with these enormous runoff areas. We could quite easily adapt the radius of a certain corner, for example. So those areas, those circuits, absolutely let's use this simulation tool to perhaps improve them if we can. So I think it's a good thing. Let's not worry too much about the old circuits yet. Let's look at the positives, that Formula One are taking this very seriously and looking at how we can improve the infrastructure around the racing to give us the best shot of getting good racing in the future as well. So thumbs up to F1 for that. Two more. One from Kevin Stevenson says, hey Mark, do you think the driving styles and energy management techniques will make the pathway between F1 and Formula E more relevant? We've already seen ex-F1 drivers in Formula E, but can you ever see drivers going the other way? Yeah, I can actually, and you're right, you make a good point, because the energy management techniques that Formula E drivers and teams, and this applies to engineers as well as the drivers, are all learning and developing and becoming experts at within the world of Formula E, absolutely now apply in Formula One, and probably will apply even more as Formula One moves forward, and this electrical side, the hybrid side of Formula One becomes more of a component. So can I see drivers going from FE to F1? Yeah, I can. I actually thought we came very close to Felix Rosenqvist a couple of years ago, last year, potentially going on from Formula E to Formula 1. He's perhaps the biggest young driver that I thought might take that step up. In the end, he's made a big move to IndyCar, a great move for him, but he's a wonderful driver who shone in Formula E and was definitely on the radar of some Formula 1 teams as well. And I suspect there are going to be more and more. You know, this is becoming a platform now, Formula E, for young drivers. It's no longer just a place that you might want to go and tick off your list at the end of your career. Young drivers are all desperate to get into Formula E. It's a highly professional championship. In fact, it's one of very few championships where all the drivers in the championship are well paid. It's got all the manufacturers involved, so it's a great place to be, and I think absolutely it's going to become even more and more relevant for the reasons you talked about: energy management, driving style, efficiency, because those elements are going to become more and more important in other types of racing as we move forward. So yeah, very, very good point. And finally, this question from Dan the Indoor Man. He says, if McLaren produce a reasonably competitive car this year, will the bosses allow the drivers to race each other, especially after the disappointment of the last few years? Wouldn't they just want the cars home safe and bag the points instead of risking DNFs? Well, great question, Dan, because if McLaren do produce a good car, the next question then is, are both drivers going to be similarly paced with each other? Are they going to come out at a similar level? Are they always going to be around the same points on the racetrack? And you may well remember, I'm sure most of you do, this happened in 2007 when I was at McLaren, and we had a situation where, you know, Fernando Alonso, Lewis Hamilton, very equally matched, and we're always fighting for wins, you know, essentially taking points off each other. The team, what do the team do in that situation? Well, I think in the beginning of the season, absolutely they'll let the drivers race. They wouldn't stop that. That'll be their outlook. That'll be their public point of view. We're going to let the guys go for it. What will happen though, and it's not just about whether the two drivers are close to each other and evenly matched, it's as much about their attitude behind the scenes. And that's what the team will see long before we as fans and viewers see it. That's exactly what happened in 2007. You start to see this animosity starting to build between the two drivers. You start to see the rivalry go from a kind of happy, friendly rivalry to a little bit of a bitter rivalry, where they really start taking it very seriously, that almost like their teammate, the guy on the other side of the garage, is the enemy, not just a teammate anymore. That's when it starts to become problematic. That's when it becomes poisonous within the organisation, and that is when the team has to really step in before that happens, really, to try and avoid that. And that might be with team orders. It might be with a bigger sort of element of transparency in the way they go about doing things and providing equipment and opportunities and race strategies for their drivers. So it's not an easy thing to manage. Got it very wrong in 2007. Mercedes did a slightly better job with Rosberg and Hamilton over the last few years, but it's not an easy dynamic to manage. But I would fully expect them to start allowing the drivers to race and then adapt it if they have to as the season goes on. Right, thank you very much, guys. Loads of questions, really appreciate them. Great questions as well. Thanks for all of those. Have a great day. Keep the questions coming. Subscribe to the channel if you're not already. Hit that like button, and I will see you tomorrow.